Hello, and welcome to Gay Solo Travel. Today, I want to talk to you about something that is travel adjacent and travel related, but not necessarily travel specific. I want to talk to you about surveillance pricing and its emerging and growing use in the world of aviation and travel, and what that means for the industry, for travelers, and all consumers alike. But why this video now, and why this video on a channel that is dedicated to gay solo travel? Well, Delta Airlines announced about a month or so ago that they were going to start further integrating the use of artificial intelligence to grow what is known as personalized pricing models, which stands as a kind of offset of what's known as dynamic pricing. So, what's the difference between surveillance pricing and dynamic pricing? Well, surveillance pricing is based more on personalized information, on information that is more closely associated with you, the individual, rather than dynamic pricing, which is based more on aggregate data, which is based more on behavioral trends more broadly and anonymously, right? The key difference between the two is that dynamic pricing is actually based more on when someone buys something, whereas surveillance or personalized pricing is actually based more on who is purchasing something. And given the way gay people are targeted, and I mean that in the broadest sense, and the way gay people have their information sort of pulled from them, either to sell them something, be it like a gay vacation or a gay cruise, let's say, or taken from them and used against them. And we can see a number of countries where private and personal information of gay and queer people is taken and used against them. And I'm assuming a lot of people who subscribe to this channel, but not necessarily exclusively, would have a vested interest in better understanding not just a pricing system, but a broader system of data collection where personal information is taken from them and quite possibly used against them, right? To target them as consumers, but maybe even more than just consumers. The outcome of the shift from when to who can be perilous, and it's quite concerning, and all the more so for individuals who are vulnerable, who are of a minority background, who are already easy targets, and for people who are more susceptible to the dynamics of the market. So I think it's important before we actually dive into surveillance pricing in aviation that we talk about different pricing models, and maybe even in different industries, just so that we can take a step back from the focus on surveillance pricing in aviation, so that we can have an understanding of some of the terminology and how it operates in different industries as a way to create a foundation before we dive into how surveillance pricing operates in aviation and how it can impact gay solo travelers, all travelers alike, and even what the broader ramifications of this emerging, largely AI supported model means for all consumers in the present and, of course, in the future. A dynamic pricing model basically means that the price of something fluctuates frequently and on a regular basis. So think of something like a rideshare, Uber being a really good example. Depending on how many drivers are on the road, how many people are making requests for a ride, how far it is that you want to go, the likelihood of the individual that's on the road wanting to commit to taking you wherever it is that you want to go, what the demand is at that point in time, that all will be used to determine the price of your rideshare at that particular point in time. And of course, that price can change rapidly within 5 minutes, within 10 minutes. If you close the app and reopen it, the price could change. Dynamic pricing is all about fluctuations and volatility, whereas something like, let's say, a fixed pricing model that is used more in the realm of, let's say, grocery shopping or purchasing electronics, even buying a cup of coffee, where pricing is a lot more static and the intervals for changes, whether the prices go up or down, is more prolonged and over a longer period of time. And of course, is far more static than erratic, right? So dynamic pricing is really um, more erratic than static, whereas fixed pricing is more static than erratic. So think of something like the price of groceries, right? Sometimes a vegetable, let's say, could go on sale, so the price goes down. But then maybe the price of something also goes up if a particular vegetable that you're looking for, let's say, is out of season. But regardless, the price of that, again, takes place over a prolonged period of time, over a number of weeks, and there's usually a stable fixed point, rather than, let's say, something like a rideshare that doesn't really have a fixed point. You know, the ride that you want to take from point A to point B could be $5 or $20, depending on a number of factors, some of which I identified, just now. So if you look at something, let's say, like your daily cup of coffee, and let's say you want like a large double double, two cream, two sugars, it's going to cost $2. Whether you buy it today, tomorrow, a month later, a year later, if you buy it in the morning, in the afternoon, or evening, it's always going to be $2. Yes, with any fixed pricing system, the price could go up. But again, that's more likely to be a result of something like inflation or increases in cost of production, labor costs, milk, dairy, cups, etc., etc. The price of a cup of coffee isn't going to fluctuate throughout the day. Now, let's say this imaginary coffee shop decides to employ a dynamic pricing model. Well, then the cost of your cup of coffee could be, maybe $1 between, 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. And it could be, $5 between, 7 and 9 and 11 and 1, when most office workers tend to be making their way into the office or on their lunch break. So those are the main differences between fixed price models and dynamic price models. And I would say that there are two real reasons or advantages for an organization or a company employing a dynamic pricing model. One, it allows them to take advantage of or profiteer from the demand for their product or service. And secondly, and in a distant second, I would say, it also allows them to potentially save on labor costs and make better use of the resources that they have by maybe flattening, the peaks and the surge periods, allowing them again to make not having to sort of like engage in surge hiring or having to bring a bunch of people on board, reducing the chaos, and again, just spreading demand out throughout the day rather than having to try to satisfy, um, these peak periods where demand just sort of spikes and then dissipates. The world of aviation, as we all know, employs a dynamic pricing model. And this has been the case for decades. It's fully normalized, as the system that the aviation industry employs, and travelers and everyone in the industry alike just accepts it for what it is. So if you look at something like buying a plane ticket, well, we know that there are peaks when people want to fly. And of course, we also know that there are peaks when people can only fly. And so does the industry itself, right? The summer season is a busy season. March break, reading week, spring break, those are busy periods as well. The Christmas, winter holiday season, of course, is another really busy period. Anything around long weekends and holidays as well, but the demand during those periods of time aren't as high as, summer, the winter holiday, and reading slash spring break. So prices during that period in general are going to be quite high because, again, it's a dynamic pricing model. The industry knows that demand during that period is high because that's when people have, want to take vacation or when they have to take vacation. And so because the demand is high, they're going to increase prices. And again, for them, it's about taking advantage of the demand. Hey, if a lot of people are willing to pay, well, who's willing to pay the highest price for that ticket? But it's also a way for the aviation industry, which is a very unique industry in many respects to try to make a better use of their resources. There's only a certain amount of planes and a certain amount of staff that, airlines have. It's not like other industries where maybe they can bring in more of a supply or they can bring in more staff. It takes a long time to train, flight attendants, and flight attendants can be, quite labor intensive. Um, uh, Cost intensive, I would say. It costs a lot of money to keep a flight attendant on payroll. So obviously you want to use them and your planes as much as you can. So, the industry doesn't exactly keep planes on the side, and it can't just rent planes from somewhere. It doesn't keep, it can't just go to Boeing and Airbus and say, hey, can I have a plane for 2 months and then take it back? That's not how it works. Planes and resources are there, and they're kind of permanent and they're fixed. So, the industry is constantly using all of them, and it's constantly calculating the maximum, amount that it can fill and use all the resources that they have. And so, of course, they're going to leverage dynamic pricing, along with, an understanding of aggregate, demand to determine the cost, of something. Again, none of this is new. Dynamic pricing has been the norm in the aviation, industry for decades now. And entire businesses have grown around trying to get people the cheapest tickets. There are several websites and businesses that are, that completely revolve themselves around, advice about, when to book. There are strategies. People even bet, hoping that the price of something is going to go down. Oh, well, if I wait a week, I think it's going to go down. If you book your ticket 6 months in advance or, a month in advance, it's going to be cheaper than if you book it 3 months in advance. And there is a bit of a strategy, it's true that if you book your ticket on a certain day or at a certain time of the day, it can be cheaper than if you book it during on another day. Like if you book like on a Tuesday night, it's cheaper than like a Saturday afternoon. Again, this is all an example of dynamic pricing that is based on trends. It's based on aggregate data, and it's completely normalized, in the aviation industry. Surveillance pricing is a bit different, and it doesn't just augment what information is being used in an aggregate, a dynamic pricing model, but it could actually completely replace all that information because it's less about what the broader consensus is, and it's more about you, the individual, and it's tailored based on you and your demand. And that is actually something to be very, very concerned about. Again, not just in the world of aviation, but just in general as a consumer too. Case in point, a trip that I took to Southeast Asia last year employed, or at least I think and I felt employed, personalized pricing when it was determining the cost of a plane ticket for myself. So I'm not going to name the airline that I flew with, but long story short, I was doing some research. I was looking at different places to go, and then I started focusing increasingly on Southeast Asia. I was playing around with dates. I was looking at hotels and so on and so forth. And eventually I, found a ticket for $1,200, based on, the time frame that I wanted to go. And I started the process of booking everything. And then right before I got to the end, right before I hit the confirmation button, I was like, oh, wait a second, I should log in to my loyalty account so I can collect, the points or the miles. Big mistake. Huge. Why? Because all of a sudden, the price of that ticket jumped by $300. Imagine, as a loyal customer, I was being charged more than an anonymous user. I quickly shut everything down. I deleted my cookies. I reopened, a browser in private mode, but the damage was done. All of the pieces had connected, and the system knew who I was, and it knew that I wanted to go to Southeast Asia, and it knew that I wanted to go during these times, and it knew that I wanted to book this ticket. And so, try as I might, I couldn't find that ticket price again. And so I booked. I booked for $1,500. Actually, I think it was closer to $1,550. And I was mad about it then, and I'm still mad about it now. But I booked the ticket. And I think that that example, which, and this was last year in the fall of 2023, and that was, sorry, 2024, and that was before, Delta made its announcement about, personalized pricing and so on and so forth. So even by last year, and that's the first time I ever saw something like that, I noticed changes in the way pricing in the world of aviation was starting to take root. And again, there are going to be some really serious consequences that go far beyond the world of aviation for all travelers and all consumers. The purpose of surveillance pricing is to identify what's known as your pain point, the maximum amount of money you are willing to pay before you walk away or before you break, which of course is very different than a fixed pricing, system and a dynamic pricing system. It's based on collecting personal information, personal data on you to create a portrait, to create a composite of who you are as a consumer, and then charging you a personalized price rather than a price that is determined based on broader trends and broader, consensus of what the average individual is willing to pay for this flight, let's say at this particular point in time, and so on and so forth. So let's use for an example Bob over here and Linda over here. Both Bob and Linda live in Toronto and they both want to go to Rome. It's summertime, they both want to go on vacation, and they both hop onto a website to find flights. And let's say that because they both want to depart at the same day and they want to come back the same day, they want to fly the same time, they're going to get quoted $1,500 for their return tickets, Toronto to Rome and back. That would be based more on an aggregate and dynamic pricing model, right? Because it's the summer peak season and so on and so forth. But let's replace all that with a surveillance pricing model, with a personalized pricing model, right? So what if Linda has a flexible schedule? Right? Let's say she has a job where she's very flexible. She's a consultant, so she can go on vacation wherever she wants. And, she's also open to going to Costa Rica and Barcelona and Egypt and Japan. And let's say over here, Bob has to go to Rome. He only has vacation during a particular period in time, and he's going for a wedding, and he has to be there on a certain day, and he has to be back on a certain day. Well, under a surveillance or personalized pricing model, the system, at least in theory, would know that Bob is more desperate, let's say, than Linda. And so Linda could theoretically get charged, be quoted an $800 ticket as a way to compel her. Oh, well, actually, this is a good price versus Bob that could pay $3,000 because Bob has to go to Rome and he's sort of stuck, right? He's kind of stuck there. He doesn't really have the kind of flexibility. He doesn't have the kind of choices that Linda does. What's important to note here is that all sorts of information can and will be used against you. Your data is sticky, Data sticks to you, data sticks things to you, and your data sticks to things. And so if you are like Bob and stuck, the system is going to know that. At least it will possibly in the future, but even now, because no one is entirely sure what information companies have access to and what they're actually using to determine the price of something. So after some, blowback, Delta Airlines actually released a statement saying that they were not using this kind of personalized information, that they were using AI to sort of augment dynamic pricing models. And again, what information they have is quite vague, but they said, we don't have this level of personalized information. But many individuals have noted that, companies keep their pricing systems, they're very opaque, right? They're very closed off. We don't actually have transparency in that pricing system. So there's no real way to verify what information is actually being used by these companies and whether, not just Delta, but any company is being true or authentic in the information that they're using. So even though they say that they're not using this level of personal information, who knows, right? What if you have been texting privately about wanting to go on a vacation somewhere? What if you have in your calendar certain days blocked off with the title vacation? What if you have an email confirmation saying, congratulations, your vacation has been approved? What if you've been researching on different maps or, browsing certain regions of the world, and then the computer system recognizes that you're really focused on one particular region, let's say Rome in this example? What if you have been reviewing hotels in a particular area? What if you've put a reservation and put money down and confirmed using your money, a hotel and accommodation somewhere? Well, all of that information can be used against you, and for all we know, it could be used against us right now, you know what about your location? What about the technology you're using? So what if, a system knows that you're using an iPhone versus an Android, or if it knows that you're using a newer phone model versus an older phone model? Oh, well, this person might have money. What about your location? Right? What if you're searching and booking in a wealthy neighborhood? Oh, this person has more money. I'm going to charge them more. What if the system knows where, your home address is or your postal code and you're somewhere far away? Oh, this person, maybe they're desperate. They're not home. Maybe they have to get somewhere. Um, Conversely, what if you actually have a really old phone or a cheap phone, or if you are trying to book something from a disadvantaged or traditionally known to be disadvantaged neighborhood? Oh, well, this person doesn't have the same kind of purchasing power, right? They don't have the money. They don't have the options that other people do. We have them. They're stuck. So the applications of surveillance pricing, again, beyond aviation, are far reaching, and they are very, very concerning. And at the root of all of this is discrimination, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, what surveillance pricing is and what it really means is discriminatory pricing based on the individual, individualized discriminatory pricing. And that's concerning, again, for everyone, but for people from minority backgrounds, from people who are, again, more vulnerable to the whims of the market, is particularly concerning. So even though this is a broad topic that warrants a lot more research and a lot more conversation, and of course those conversations are ongoing, I actually just want to focus a little bit on the way in which surveillance pricing can affect solo travelers and gay travelers, because again, this is a gay solo travel website. So I'd like to focus a little bit, sort of pinpoint and on those particular issues as a way to think through some of the broader concerns of how surveillance pricing might be operating right now and could operate in the future. As of right now, the information is somewhat rudimentary. And so, what these companies have is more of a vague sketch. You know what I mean? Maybe a little bit of your browsing history. It might have your location, or maybe even like the quality of the phone that you're using. But it doesn't have things like, or at least again, for all intents and purposes, or the best to our knowledge, demographic information. But what if that stops being the case, right? And what if that's not the case at all? What if this vague profile, they start, adding, using artificial intelligence to pull information from all these different places to create a more focused and sharper image, representation of you rather than a vague sketch? What will end up being created is a kind of digital doppelganger, a digital twin, a virtual self, a data double, that exists in the online world that you created and that is created on your behalf with your information and your behavior, that kind of exists as your avatar and kind of follows you everywhere you go and can now be used against you. And never mind using the information contained in that virtual double to sell you things or to target ads towards you, but imagine if it's used against you. Imagine if it's used to identify your pain points, to gouge you, and to maybe even keep you away from doing things, or from having access to things, by arbitrarily determining pain points that are far above your pain threshold as a way to keep you away from doing things. That's very concerning. And I think that, maybe not now, but in the relatively relative near future, we could see, our information be used to not just identify us, but to classify us and to sort us, even into broad categories like desirable and undesirable. And for someone, let's say like a solo traveler, we might be desirable now because we're consumers, but what if we eventually become undesirable, right, in the future? And even same thing as gay travelers. Gay travelers in some contexts are desirable, but in other contexts we're not necessarily desirable. So what if that information starts being pulled, and rather than overt discrimination on a governmental level, organizations, like hotels, let's say, that don't want your business as a gay person, sort of have that information, and then they give you a price point knowing that it's way above, your pain point, to make sure that it's out of reach because they don't actually want your business, but someone who's over there who's straight, gets a much more affordable price. These are the concerning things that we need to think about as consumers, and of course in this context as travelers, as solo travelers, as gay travelers too. You know what I mean? I've been discriminated against as a solo traveler in the past. I was actually traveling through Greece a couple of years ago, and I was in Delphi, and it was in November, so it was during the off season. And I remember going to a restaurant, and I was hungry because there were no grocery stores, nothing was open. I was actually worried about starving throughout the evening. And I remember walking to a restaurant, and I was actually denied a table. I wasn't allowed to sit to have dinner, even though the restaurant was relatively empty, because the restaurant said, "Oh no, we need to save these tables because we're going to get busy later." And I was like, "Okay, but you're not busy now, and I'll just sit at the bar." And they're like, "No, no, no, we don't want you here." As a solo traveler, there's safety in numbers, and as a solo traveler, I was seen as undesirable in that context, not because I was seen as a source of revenue, but I was actually seen as a source of potential, that's the operative term, potential lost revenue. Because what if a group came in and I was sitting somewhere, and then they couldn't get business from that group of 4 or 5? But that excuse didn't really make a lot of sense because, like I said, the restaurant was pretty empty, and the mountain town was also, Delphi was basically empty as it is too. So was it, that I was a solo traveler and I was undesirable because I was going to potentially cost them money? Or was that just an excuse? And really, they just didn't want, a gay in their establishment. It's hard to know. And again, as a solo traveler and as a gay traveler, I think that and you, if you identify similarly, we are far more susceptible to discrimination, to the whims of the marketplace. And so again, something like surveillance pricing, as it potentially could expand, and maybe expand in a way that isn't entirely regulated or transparent, can actually have really serious consequences for people like us. The way that our personal information can be used against us, not just to charge us more money, but also to sort of overcharge us to the point, where what was once previously accessible is no longer accessible because people just don't want our business. What if an airline has 5 seats available, and you want to book a ticket, but there's a family of 5 that's possibly looking at booking? Well, you booking that ticket isn't going to be a source of revenue in the eyes of that carrier. It's going to be seen as a source of potential lost revenue because you're costing them for plane tickets, and the same can go for hotels, for excursions. There are a multitude of things, again, in the aviation and travel industry, but far beyond, where your data can be used against you to identify not just pain points, but breaking points purposefully so, and where you as an individual with money, maybe not a lot of money, but some money, um, could be seen as someone that is undesirable. And in the realm of of solo travel, it's quite possible that solo travel could, become a thing of the past, or at least something different than it is now. It could become a luxury, right? People could pay a premium for the luxury of traveling on their own rather than in a group. Because again, maybe with surveillance pricing and with this sort of impetus towards, cost efficiency and optimization, that's the term. optimizing space. Um, Solo travelers could be seen as again as undesirable because we may not fit with that optimization model. We're taking up not just a space but a potential space from a larger group, and so maybe you know, in the future, people will have to travel as a group, as a tour group, as a way to maximize and optimize, space. And solo travel is something that will only be for those with wealth and financial privilege. So something that is widespread and relatively accessible. It is getting more expensive, just like living on your own. It is cheaper, of course, to share a room with someone, and so on and so forth. And don't even get me started on this supplemental tax that resorts charge you. There's already discrimination against solo travelers as it is. So we're already seeing the foundation of this kind of discriminatory practicing um, taking root, and that's really, really concerning. Because what surveillance pricing is really about, beyond discrimination, of course, that's what's in the foreground, but in the background, there's something more rotten, you know. And what's really rotten to the core about surveillance pricing is that what it has the power to do is to actually completely get rid of objective reality, of objective pricing, and replace it entirely with something that is fully subjective. So imagine if surveillance pricing becomes the norm, there would be no such thing as objective, of real, of truth, right? Because what is real and what is what is real and true for you. Whatever is quoted as a price for you, that is now objective truth. There is no way to escape that enclosure. There is no way to escape that informational dragnet. Whatever is being quoted for you, that's truth. There would be no standardized price. There would be nothing to compare it to, right? And so what you get quoted as a price, in theory, for anything could be radically different. And so you could theoretically be living in a completely different economic reality than your friends or your family, your neighbor, your coworker. There would be no objective truth in the world of economic pricing. And in a capitalist society and in a consumer society where everything is reduced to a exchange of money for goods and services, where what we do in this modern world is shop and buy things and sell things. It, it surveillance pricing can actually do away with this idea of objective reality, of objective truth, because again, the foundation of our world is consumer exchanges. That is the terrifying core of surveillance pricing. So when you start to peel back the layers, when you go from like fixed pricing, seasonal, up and down, and then dynamic pricing, okay, with ride shares, we don't use it all that often, and so on and so forth. And then it's like, okay, surveillance pricing, and now it's getting a bit, for the bigger purchases and things that may not necessarily be essential, but are semi-essential, I would say. Flying and traveling are semi-essential. I mean, you're not necessarily going to die, but they're not something it's not superfluous either. It's more than just a vacation. People immigrate, people go to school, people have businesses, funerals, weddings, etc., etc. Imagine if surveillance pricing were to be applied to essentials like groceries and housing and medicine and healthcare. This is actually very, very, very concerning. And again, I'm concerned not just about the way that surveillance pricing will change the world of aviation, will change the world of travel, the way it can impact people such as myself, solo travelers, gay travelers, people that, again, I think are more susceptible and a bit more vulnerable to some of these dynamics. And, again, as a gay man, just the idea of my information being used against me is just very icky and it makes me feel very, very uncomfortable. But I'm more concerned about this being deemed a success in other industries, starting to employ this model. So, without proper regulation and without transparency, again, what we could see is this model take over, and the idea of an objective reality just kind of disappearing. And that's something to be really, really, really concerned about. And I know this is starting to sound a bit like a Black Mirror episode. And it seems as though we're almost moving towards an economic social credit system too. And this is all being done through, the system of capitalism that's supposed to be about freedom and freedom of exchange and this and that. What we're actually seeing is this enclosure kind of forming around us, because again, without these sorts of protections, what freedom do we really have, right? Because freedom is always a double-edged sword. The freedom to do something, let's say, and the freedom from something. So without the freedom from this enclosure, we won't have the freedom to do these things within that enclosure either. So thank you for watching this video. I hope you found it at least informative. Presumably you didn't find it the most pleasurable viewing experience, but I do hope that it has explained to you in the simplest way possible, the evolution of pricing and what this new incarnation called surveillance pricing means for you as a consumer, whether it has to do with purchasing a plane ticket or not, or whether you are a solo traveler or a gay traveler or not. But again, I also hope that given that this is a channel dedicated to gay solo travel, you can now see why I decided to make this video and why I felt that there was an urgent need to put this video out there to provide information and inform travelers of all kinds, but of course, solo, gay, and of course, gay solo travelers in particular. Thank you again for watching. If you, I'm not going to say if you liked this video, please like and subscribe, but if you found this video informative, please do like and subscribe, and of course please do feel free to comment below. I would love to hear from you on your thoughts of on what this means for you, what you think this means for the broader community as a whole. Any ideas on how to resist this? Like, do we all use VPNs? Do we try to create misinformation in the system? Like, I really want to go to Thailand when actually you really want to go to Rome. Do we put fake dates in our calendars? I'm interested in hearing from you your thoughts on Delta's plan to introduce this new to use AI for pricing the cost of a plane ticket, how you think this is going to impact you, and so on and so forth. And again, please do like and subscribe. It will incentivize me to continue to create this content, and it'll also give me an indication of what content it is that you're looking from me and from this channel. Until then, stay safe and think twice before you click accept all cookies. Ciao.